Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. Years ago, two friends and I went camping during the fall. The kind of trip that feels calm and grounding at first and slowly turns into something you never quite shake off. We were camping in the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to swallow sound. The air was cool and damp, the kind that settles into your clothes and hair without you noticing right away. Fall had already taken hold. Leaves were starting to rot on the forest floor, and everything smelled earthy and wet. It was beautiful, but also heavy in a way that's hard to describe unless you've spent time in those woods. We weren't doing anything extreme or adventurous, just a simple camping trip, one night out in nature, away from the noise of daily life. We had a small tent, just big enough for the three of us. When we laid down to sleep, we staggered our positions to make it fit. Two of our heads were on one side of the tent, close together, and the third person's head was on the opposite side. Our bodies overlapped slightly, sleeping bags brushing against each other, the thin tent wall only inches from our faces. That night was unusually quiet. There was no wind, no rain, no animals making noise nearby. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. As the night went on, fog started to roll in, slow and thick, creeping through the trees and settling low to the ground. Even inside the tent, we could feel the moisture in the air. The kind of fog that muffles sound and makes everything feel distant and unreal. At some point, I woke up without knowing why. I wasn't startled awake. I just surfaced out of sleep, hovering in that half-awake state where your mind hasn't fully caught up yet. I lay there for a moment, listening. Everything felt still. My friend's breathing was steady. The tent was quiet. I was just starting to drift back to sleep when I heard it. At first, I thought I was dreaming. It sounded like a muffled voice, the way someone sounds when they're talking on a cell phone with bad reception. The sound wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to make out words. The voice kept saying, "Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?" Over and over again. The tone wasn't aggressive or threatening. It sounded confused, like someone genuinely trying to reach another person and failing. The strangest part was where it was coming from. The sound wasn't outside the tent. It wasn't distant. It was coming from inside the tent, from the center, right between all of our heads. It felt like the voice was coming from the exact middle point where our sleeping bags met, close enough that it felt invasive. Too close. Before I could fully process what was happening, one of my friends spoke up in a low, uncertain voice. They asked, "Are you hearing that?" The moment they said it, my stomach dropped. That question confirmed I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't dreaming. No, someone else was hearing it too. Immediately, all three of us sat up at the same time. Sleeping bags rustled, elbows bumped. The tent shifted slightly as we scrambled around, suddenly wide awake and alert. Our first instinct was practical. We assumed it had to be a phone. One of us must have accidentally left a phone in the tent. And maybe it was picking up a call or some weird signal. We started digging through everything. Sleeping bags, pockets, backpacks. We felt around the floor of the tent, I checking every inch. The voice continued for a few seconds longer, still saying the same thing. "Hello? Can you hear me?" Then it stopped. There was no phone. We froze, hands still, breathing heavy in the cramped space. The silence afterward felt louder than the voice itself. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then I turned toward my friend on the opposite side of the tent and asked them what they heard, wanting to make absolutely sure we were all experiencing the same thing. They answered without hesitation. They said it sounded like someone saying, "Hello? Can you hear me?" The exact same words, the exact same tone. They also said it sounded like it was coming from the other side of the tent, not from their own side. That detail stuck with me. All three of us agreed on the same things. The words, the sound, the location, and the fact that it wasn't coming from any one person's belongings. We didn't laugh it off. No one made jokes. The mood shifted completely. The fog outside pressed in on the tent, making everything feel smaller and more enclosed. We talked quietly, trying to piece together explanations. Maybe someone nearby was on the phone. Maybe sound traveled strangely in the fog, but none of it made sense. The campground was silent. We hadn't seen or heard anyone else nearby. And the voice didn't sound like it was echoing through the woods. It sounded like it was right there with us. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear. We lay back down, though none of us slept well after that. Every small sound made us tense. Every movement of the tent fabric felt amplified. I remember staring into the darkness, listening for the voice to come back, half expecting it to start again at any moment. It never did. Morning came slowly. The fog lingered, thick and heavy, clinging to the trees and the ground. Everything looked muted and gray, like the color had been drained from the world. We packed up quietly, all of us still thinking about the night before. Before leaving, we checked the car. All of our cell phones were sitting exactly where we had left them, untouched inside the vehicle. None of us had brought a phone into the tent, not one. To make things even stranger, there was no cell reception at the campground. No bars, no signal, nothing. Even if a phone had been nearby, it wouldn't have been able to make or receive a call. That realization sealed it for me. Whatever we heard wasn't a phone. It wasn't someone nearby. It wasn't interference or a bad signal. Three people heard the same thing, at the same time, from the same place, and there was no physical source for it. Years have passed since that night, but the memory still sends shivers up my spine. It wasn't loud or violent or dramatic. It was quiet, confused, almost human in a way that made it worse. The voice wasn't trying to scare us. It sounded like it was trying to connect, trying to be heard, and failing. Sometimes, that's what makes experiences like that linger. Not the fear, but the unanswered question. Who was speaking? Why did it sound like a phone call? And why did it happen right there, in the middle of us, on a night so still that even the forest seemed to be listening? I've been camping many times since then. I've slept in tents, cabins, and under the open sky. I've heard animals, wind, rain, and strange natural sounds. But I've never heard anything like that again. And I hope I never do, because once you hear something that shouldn't be possible, in a place where there's no explanation, it changes the way silence feels forever. I was very young when this happened. Young enough that sleep still came easily, and dreams blended into reality without warning. I remember that night clearly, even though so many years have passed. I was lying in my bed, wrapped in my blanket, with my right ear pressed deep into my pillow. The house was quiet in that way only nighttime can be quiet, when even small sounds feel louder because everything else has gone still. I must have already been asleep for some time, because I had no memory of drifting off. One moment there was nothing, and the next moment everything changed. I was jolted awake by a sudden roar, so loud and so close that it felt like it went straight into my right ear. It wasn't like a normal noise, not like a shout or something falling. It was deeper, heavier, almost like sound itself had weight. For a split second, I thought something had exploded right beside my head. My heart started racing before my mind could catch up, and I sat up fast, gasping for air as if I had been underwater. I was completely confused. My body was awake, but my thoughts were tangled and slow, still caught halfway in sleep. Panic crept in almost immediately, spreading through my chest and into my arms. I started scanning my room, my eyes darting from corner to corner, searching for anything that could explain what had just happened. Shadows stretched strangely in the dark, made longer by the faint light coming in through the window. Every familiar object suddenly looked unfamiliar, like my room had shifted slightly while I slept. My mind was close to full panic mode. I didn't know if the sound had come from inside the house or inside my head. I listened closely, holding my breath, waiting to hear it again. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. Just the soft hum of the house settling and my own breathing, fast and uneven. That was when I turned my head to the right. Standing beside my bed was a little boy. At first, my brain couldn't fully process what I was seeing. He looked real, solid, like any other child. He was about my size, maybe a little smaller. He stood close enough that I felt like I could reach out and touch him. He wasn't threatening or scary in the way monsters are supposed to be. He wasn't twisted or distorted. He was just a boy. What made him different was the light. He was glowing blue. It wasn't a harsh glow, not bright enough to hurt my eyes. It was soft, almost gentle, like moonlight filtered through water. The glow wrapped around him evenly, outlining his small body and making his face easy to see even in the dark. The blue light reflected faintly off my bed and the wall, giving the room an unreal, dreamlike feel. But strangely, that wasn't the first thing I noticed. The first thing I noticed was his face. He looked sad. Not crying, not angry, just deeply sad in a quiet way that felt heavy. His eyes held a kind of loneliness that I didn't have words for back then, but somehow I understood it anyway. There was something about him that made my chest ache. Instead of fear, I felt sympathy. I remember feeling bad for him, the same way you feel bad when you see another kid sitting alone on a playground. We just looked at each other for a moment. Time felt slow, stretched thin. I don't remember screaming or trying to run. I don't remember calling for my parents. I was scared, yes. But the fear was muted by confusion and an odd sense of calm. It felt like he didn't mean any harm. It felt like he was there for a reason, even if I didn't understand what that reason was. After a minute, or maybe longer, I worked up the courage to move. Slowly, carefully, I leaned a little closer to him. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't know what I was supposed to do or say, but something inside me told me not to pull away. Instead, I muttered a quiet "hey." My voice was barely louder than a whisper, shaky and unsure. The moment the word left my mouth, he disappeared. There was no flash, no dramatic movement. He didn't fade slowly or walk away. He was simply gone, like he had never been there at all. The space beside my bed was empty again, just air and shadows. The blue light vanished with him, and my room snapped back into darkness. I froze. I stared at the spot where he had been, my mind racing now. I fear finally catching up with me. I pulled my blanket tighter around myself and sat there, listening, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. The house remained silent. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back into sleep, though it wasn't peaceful. I woke up the next morning with the memory still fresh, replaying in my head, as if it had happened seconds ago. A few days later, I told my mother what I had seen. I didn't know how she would react. I was worried she would laugh or tell me it was just a dream. But she listened carefully, her expression serious as I explained everything in my own clumsy, childlike way. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, like she was thinking about something. Then she told me something that made my stomach twist. She explained that the people who owned the house before us had a son. He had died when he was 5 years old in a car accident. She didn't know many details, only that it had been tragic and devastating for the family. What made it stranger was that the accident hadn't happened near the house. It wasn't like he had died there or been hurt on the property. At the time, I didn't fully understand what that meant. I just knew that the boy I had seen was about the same age. The thought settled into my mind and stayed there, growing heavier as I got older. There was something else about the house that mattered too. When we moved in, the house had already been renovated. A second floor had been added, changing its original shape and layout. Walls had been moved, rooms restructured. What I thought of as my bedroom hadn't always existed in the same way. The house I lived in wasn't exactly the same house the boy had known. As I grew older, I started thinking about that night more deeply. Memories have a way of changing over time, but this one stayed clear. I remembered his sad expression more than anything else. Not fear, not shock, just sadness. It made me wonder why he had appeared to me specifically. My current theory is the only explanation that feels right to me. I think the boy finally found his way back home. Maybe wherever he had been, wherever he had gone after the accident, he eventually returned to the place he remembered as safe. The place that was supposed to be home. But when he arrived, everything was different. The house had changed. His old home was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar. New rooms, new walls, new people. I think he was confused, lost in a place that was once his. And I think he came to me because I was the new boy of the house. I was the one who slept in the space that didn't exist when he was alive. I was the one who had taken his place without even knowing it. Maybe he wasn't trying to scare me. Maybe he just wanted to be seen. Maybe he wanted acknowledgement or understanding, or simply to know that someone was there. That would explain the sadness in his eyes. He didn't stay long. Maybe once he realized that his home was truly gone, that things could never be the way they were, he left. Or maybe he just needed that brief moment of connection. A quiet hello in the dark. Whatever the truth is, that night has stayed with me. Not as a nightmare, but as a strange, gentle memory. One that makes me wonder about the idea of home and how deeply it can be tied to who we are, even after everything else is taken away. I used to work at a museum that had once been a fully functioning prison. Long before it became a place for tours and history lessons, it had been a place of punishment, confinement, anger, and suffering. By the time I started working there, the cells were empty and the bars were cold to the touch. But the atmosphere never felt empty. From the very beginning, there was a sense that the past had not fully let go of that place. I worked there for over 8 years. And during that time, I experienced more things than I can easily explain. At first, I tried to be rational about it. I told myself that old buildings make strange noises, that the mind can play tricks on you when you're tired, especially when you're working late shifts in dim lighting. But the longer I stayed there, the harder it became to ignore what was happening. These weren't just sounds or feelings. These were physical encounters. I was pushed more times than I can count. Sometimes it felt like a firm shove to the shoulder. Other times like hands pressing against my back, forcing me forward when no one was there. I was slapped across the arm once while standing completely alone in a hallway. I had something bite me hard enough to leave a mark, a sharp pain that made me yell out in shock. I was dragged by my clothing, pulled backward as if someone had grabbed onto me and didn't want to let go. I was even punched once, a sudden blow that knocked the breath out of me and sent me stumbling. There was never anyone there when these things happened. Nighttime was always the worst. Locking up the buildings after hours was part of the job, and it was the part everyone dreaded the most. Each building had its own energy, its own personality, but some were far more active than others. As I walked through dark hallways, flashlight in hand, keys jingling too loudly in the silence, I never knew what I might see when I turned a corner. That uncertainty created a constant tension that sat heavy in my chest. Some nights, it was just the feeling of being watched. Other nights, it was footsteps behind me that stopped the moment I turned around. And then there were the nights when things made themselves known in ways that couldn't be brushed off. One night, I went into the cell house to turn off the lights. The cell house was one of the oldest parts of the prison. A long stretch of metal bars, concrete floors, and narrow walkways. Even during the day, it felt oppressive. At night, it felt alive. Every sound echoed, every movement felt amplified. I rounded a doorway, already uneasy, and came face to face with a full-bodied apparition. He was standing there in an inmate's uniform, solid and unmistakable. He wasn't transparent or misty. He looked real, like a living person who had simply stepped out of a cell. For a split second, my brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I thought maybe someone had wandered into a restricted area, maybe a co-worker playing a cruel joke. Then he vanished. There was no fade, no warning. He was just gone. The space he had occupied suddenly empty. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it echoed off the walls. The lights buzzed overhead, and the cell house felt colder than it had moments before. I finished my task as quickly as I could and got out of there without looking back. That wasn't even the only entity I encountered regularly. There was one inmate in particular who had been notorious when the prison was still active. He had been involved in one of the major riots, a violent event that left lasting scars on the facility and on the people who survived it. Stories about him were still told by staff, passed down like warnings. According to the records, he had been aggressive, unpredictable, and deeply angry. His spirit, for lack of a better word, seemed to have attached itself to me. I would feel him following me as I walked the grounds. The sensation was unmistakable, like a presence just a step behind, always just out of sight. Sometimes I would hear footsteps matching mine, stopping when I stopped. Other times, I would feel a pressure in the air, heavy and hostile, as if someone was standing too close. It didn't matter where I went. He was there. One night, I was with a paranormal investigation group that had been granted special access. They were professionals, respectful of the space, and fully aware of the history of the prison. We went into an area that we never allow the public to visit because it's in serious disrepair. The floors are unstable, the walls cracked, and parts of the structure are barely holding together. Even during the day, it's dangerous. At night, It feels downright wrong. As soon as we entered, the atmosphere changed. The air felt thick, almost hard to breathe. The group set up their equipment, whispering to one another, trying not to disturb whatever might be there. I stayed close, already uneasy. That's when it happened. We were screamed at to leave. It wasn't a distant sound or a faint voice. It was loud, furious, and clear. The sound echoed through the space, bouncing off the walls. At the same time, something snarled directly at me, a deep animalistic sound filled with pure aggression. I felt it in my bones. Every instinct in my body told me that whatever was there did not want us there, especially me. We didn't argue. We left immediately. Encounters like that were not uncommon. Shadow figures were a regular occurrence, not just for me, but for my co-workers as well. We would see them moving along walls, darting through doorways, standing at the end of corridors. Sometimes they would just watch. Other times they would follow, I staying just close enough to be noticed, but never fully revealing themselves. Visitors experienced it too. There were days when people would come running out of certain buildings, faces pale, breathless, saying they felt chased. Maximum security was especially bad. More than once, visitors refused to continue tours after stepping inside. Some claimed they were followed. Others said something whispered to them, or that they felt hands brushing against them. A few left the grounds entirely, shaken and silent. By the time my 8 years there came to an end, I had dozens of stories, enough to fill hours of conversation, enough to convince even the biggest skeptics that something remains in places like that. Prisons hold pain, fear, rage, and despair, and not all of it fades when the doors close for good. That museum may look quiet now, preserved and educational, but beneath the surface, it still remembers what it was. And sometimes it reminds the people who walk its halls that the past is never as gone as we like to believe. If you want, you can send the next story whenever you're ready. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. Whenever I get sick, something strange happens to me. It doesn't matter if it's a mild cold or a full-blown flu. Every time my body weakens, my sleep changes, and with it comes the same nightmare. It has followed me for as long as I can remember, repeating itself with such consistency that it feels less like a dream and more like something waiting for me the moment I close my eyes. For context, my room has always been a little chaotic. I have a metal bed frame that creaks if I move too much, and I've never been the neatest person. Clothes end up on the floor, books pile up where they don't belong, and my closet is usually more of a storage space than an organized place. That mess has always felt normal to me, comforting even. But in my dreams, it becomes something else entirely. Whenever I'm sick, the same dream starts the same way. I find myself lying in bed, unable to move. I'm aware of my surroundings, aware of my own body, but completely frozen. My room looks exactly the way it does in real life, down to the smallest details. The lighting is dim, heavy, like the air itself has weight. Sitting on the metal frame at the foot of my bed is a woman. She looks like she's in her 30s, though it's hard to tell for sure. Her black hair is long and horribly tangled, clumped together as if it hasn't been brushed or washed in years. Her skin looks wrong. It's pale in some places, dark in others, and covered in patches that resemble fungus, like mold growing on damp walls. It looks sick, decaying, but still alive. Her eyes are the worst part. They glow silver, Not bright like headlights, but dull and cold, reflecting just enough light to make sure I can't ignore them. She never smiles. She never frowns. She doesn't blink or breathe in any way I can notice. She just sits there, completely still, watching me. Hours seem to pass. I know it's a dream, but it doesn't feel like one. Time stretches endlessly. My body aches from not being able to move. My mind screams for me to wake up, to do something, anything, but I can't. She never touches me. She never speaks. She just watches, like she's waiting for something to happen. Toward the end of the dream, something always changes. Her face begins to shift, slowly, painfully, like wet clay being molded by invisible hands. The tangled hair becomes familiar. The shape of her face sharpens into something I recognize. And then I realize that she is becoming me. In the final moments, I'm no longer lying in the bed. I'm standing where she was, looking down at my own body, watching myself trapped and helpless. That's when I usually wake up. Except one time I didn't. There was one time when I was extremely sick, sicker than usual. All I could do was sleep. My body felt heavy, feverish, disconnected from itself. I drifted in and out of consciousness for hours, sometimes days, barely aware of what was real. That was the time when the dream changed. I went to sleep, expecting the woman again. Instead, I woke up unable to breathe. At least that's what it felt like. Something was sitting on my chest, crushing the air out of my lungs. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move my arms, my legs, even my fingers, but nothing responded. The only part of me I could control were my eyes. Panic flooded my mind as I realized I was completely pinned down. When I forced my eyes open, I saw it. A gargoyle was sitting on my chest. It was heavy, solid, crouched low like a predator. Its skin looked like rough stone, cracked and aged, and its face was twisted into a permanent snarl, its claws pressed into me, keeping me completely immobilized. I could feel its weight, feel the pressure, feel the fear pounding through my body. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. My eyes were forced toward my closet. The closet door was open, and the inside looked exactly the way it had when I went to sleep. Every detail was right. The clothes were piled where I left them. Socks were scattered across the floor in the same careless way. Nothing was rearranged, nothing distorted. It looked like real life, not a dream version of it. That's what made it worse. Standing inside the closet was something far taller than any human should be. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. Its body was broad and unnatural, covered in dark, rough skin. Its eyes glowed yellow, sharp and intelligent in a way that made my stomach twist. Long claws extended from its hands, curved and thick, capable of tearing through flesh with ease. Massive red wings folded behind its back. The membrane stretched tight between spikes that jutted out like weapons. Its head was the most terrifying part. It looked like a dragon's head, elongated and angular, with a mouth full of teeth that looked far too real. When it moved, the sound of its joints shifting felt loud in the silence of the room. It stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Each step brought it closer to my bed. The gargoyle on my chest didn't move, didn't need to. It was only there to keep me helpless, to make sure I couldn't look away, couldn't escape. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to wake up. I wanted to scream for my parents. But my body betrayed me completely. The demon stepped closer and closer until it was standing right beside my bed. I could see every detail of its face, every ridge and shadow. Its yellow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt like it was looking through me, not at me. And then I woke up screaming. I bolted upright in my bed, gasping for air, my chest aching as if something had really been sitting on it. My throat burned from the scream I hadn't been able to release in the dream. The room was empty. The closet was just a closet again. No gargoyle. No demon. Just me, shaking and soaked in sweat. I didn't tell anyone right away. Days passed before I finally told my dad about it. I tried to explain it as calmly as I could, though my voice still shook when I described the details. I told him about the paralysis, the gargoyle, the demon in the closet. I expected him to tell me it was just a nightmare, maybe stress or fever-induced hallucinations. Instead, his face went pale. After a long pause, he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said he had the same dream years ago, not something similar. Not something vaguely close. The same dream. He described the demon before I could finish, using the same words I had, the same height, the same yellow eyes, the same red wings with spikes, the same dragon-like head. The only difference was what happened to him. In his dream, the demon didn't stop at the bed. It tried to drag him underground, pulling him down into the floor as if the earth itself had opened beneath him. When my mom overheard the conversation, she confirmed it. She said that years ago he had described that exact demon to her after waking up terrified. She remembered the details because they had disturbed her so deeply. That confirmation made everything feel real in a way I wasn't prepared for. To this day, I don't know what to think of it. I don't know if it's something connected to illness, something genetic, something psychological, or something far stranger. All I know is that whenever I get sick, I dread going to sleep. Because I know that somewhere between waking and dreaming, something is waiting, watching, and sometimes it feels like it knows exactly who I am. When I was in 5th grade, there was a morning that started like any other school day, but slowly turned into something I still cannot fully explain. At that age, my life followed a simple routine. School days were predictable. Wake up, get dressed, eat breakfast, and rush out the door. That morning, though, I woke up with a sinking feeling in my stomach the moment I remembered something I had forgotten the night before. I had not put my school uniform into the laundry basket, and it was still sitting where I had left it, dirty and completely unusable for school. Lying there in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt the kind of panic only a child can feel over something that seems small, but feels enormous in the moment. Wearing a dirty uniform wasn't an option. Not wearing a uniform at all would have meant trouble at school. And telling my mom I forgot to put it in the laundry felt embarrassing. I kept thinking about how disappointed she would be, how she might be annoyed, and how it would all somehow be my fault. I stayed in bed longer than usual, replaying different ways the conversation might go, trying to work up the courage to say something. Eventually, I got up and put on my pajamas instead, since I had nothing else to wear. I walked out to the kitchen, where my parents were already having breakfast. The smell of food filled the room, and everything felt normal and calm, which made my anxiety worse. I sat down quietly and started eating, barely tasting anything. My parents talked like they always did. My mom asked how I slept. My dad read or listened quietly. My baby sister was there too, still too young to understand anything going on around her. No one noticed that I wasn't dressed for school yet. As I ate, my mind raced. I kept telling myself I would say something any second. I rehearsed the words in my head. I forgot to put my uniform in the laundry. I'm sorry. Can you help me? But every time I thought about saying it out loud, my throat tightened. I decided I would finish breakfast first and then deal with it. Maybe somehow I would figure something out. Kids often believe problems will magically solve themselves if you just wait long enough. After breakfast, I went back to my room. I remember walking down the hallway, still in my pajamas, feeling heavy with dread. I was already imagining being late for school or getting in trouble. As I pushed open my bedroom door, my mind was still focused on what I was going to say to my mom. I wasn't prepared at all for what I saw next. Standing in my room, right near where my uniform usually was a woman I had never seen before. She looked completely real. She wasn't transparent or blurry. She looked solid, like anyone else you might see in your home. She appeared to be in her 40s, with dark hair and wearing a brown dress. The dress wasn't modern or flashy, just simple and plain. She was holding an iron and was calmly ironing my school uniform, moving carefully, like she had done it 1,000 times before. For a moment, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I just stood there, frozen in the doorway. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't speak. It was like my mind stalled, trying to catch up with reality. My first thought wasn't fear. It was confusion. Who was this woman? And why was she in my room? How did she get there? Why was she ironing my clothes? She didn't look at me. She didn't seem surprised by my presence. She didn't say a word. She just continued ironing, calm and focused, like this was the most normal thing in the world. The room was quiet. I could almost hear the soft movement of fabric and imagine the sound the iron would make, though I don't remember actually hearing it. Everything felt strangely peaceful, not threatening at all. I blinked, and she was gone, just like that. 1 second she was there, and the next, the room was empty. No woman, no iron, no movement. It felt like time skipped. I stood there staring at the spot where she had been, my heart suddenly racing. I looked around the room, half expecting her to be standing somewhere else, but there was nothing. The door hadn't opened or closed. There were no footsteps, no voices, just silence. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I must have imagined the entire thing. Maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe my anxiety created some kind of hallucination. I tried to convince myself that's all it was. Kids imagine things sometimes. Stress can do weird things to your brain. I took a step into the room, still feeling shaky. And that's when I noticed my uniform. It was laid out neatly, clean, completely dry, perfectly ironed, ready to wear. I stared at it in disbelief. My heart started pounding even harder. The uniform had been dirty the night before. There was no way it could have been washed. I dried and ironed that morning. And even if someone had somehow done it, there was no time. My parents had been having breakfast with me the entire time. They hadn't left the kitchen. My sister was just a baby. She couldn't have done it. There was no one else in the house. I touched the uniform, half expecting it to disappear. It was real. Warm, even, like it had just been ironed. That detail stuck with me. If I had imagined the woman, how could the uniform be clean and pressed? How could something so physical remain? I stood there for a long time trying to make sense of it. I didn't know what to feel. Fear came later. In that moment, it was more shock than anything else. My brain kept searching for a logical explanation and coming up empty. I didn't hear anyone walking around the house. I didn't hear the washing machine. I didn't hear the iron being plugged in. And yet, there it was. Eventually, practicality took over. I needed to get dressed for school. My hands were still trembling as I put on the uniform. Everything felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream. I went back into the kitchen, dressed and ready, and no one commented on anything being unusual. No one asked how my uniform suddenly became clean. No one mentioned seeing a woman in the house. Everything continued like a normal morning. I didn't tell my parents what I saw. I didn't even know how to start that conversation. What was I supposed to say? That a stranger appeared in my room and ironed my clothes before vanishing? I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. I was afraid they would laugh it off. Or worse, worry something was wrong with me. So I kept it to myself. For years, I replayed that moment in my head. The image of the woman, her calm presence, the way she focused on ironing like she was doing me a favor rather than anything strange. She didn't feel threatening. She didn't feel evil. If anything, she felt caring, almost protective. That's what made it even more confusing. Even now, I don't have an explanation that fully satisfies me. I know what I saw. I know what I didn't see. I know what was impossible. The uniform didn't clean and iron itself. No one else could have done it, and yet there it was, ready for me, exactly when I needed it. Some people might say it was stress, imagination, or coincidence. Maybe. But deep down, it never felt like that. It felt like help. Quiet, unseen help, given without explanation or recognition. Whatever that woman was, wherever she came from, she appeared when I needed her, and disappeared without leaving anything behind except proof that she had been there. And every time I think about it, I remember how strange it is that the scariest part wasn't seeing her. The scariest part was realizing that sometimes things happen that don't fit neatly into what we think the world should be. And sometimes those things happen not to frighten us, but to quietly take care of us when we don't even know how to ask. From the time I was about 12 until I was 17 years old, I lived in a house that I truly believe was haunted. I've lived in several places since then, and I've never experienced anything even remotely similar. Whatever was happening in that house felt contained there, like it belonged to the walls, the rooms, and the space itself. When we finally moved out, the experiences stopped completely. Looking back now, that stretch of years feels like a chapter of my life that existed under different rules, where strange things were normal enough that we learned to live around them, even if we never fully accepted them. At first, nothing seemed obviously wrong with the house. It looked like any other family home. There were bedrooms, a basement, closets, and quiet corners that felt ordinary during the day. But living there over time, especially as a teenager, you start to notice things that don't quite fit. Sounds you can't explain. The feeling of being watched when you're alone. Moments where the house feels too quiet or suddenly too aware of you. At that age, it's easy to tell yourself you're just being dramatic or imaginative, especially when you don't want to seem foolish or scared. So most of the time, I kept things to myself. One memory that has never faded happened when I was doing something completely normal. I was in my room, hanging up laundry in my closet. It was daytime. The house wasn't dark or stormy or anything like that. I remember focusing on folding clothes and placing them neatly on hangers. My back was turned to the room and my head was partly inside the closet. Everything felt calm and ordinary. Then, without warning, I heard someone whisper my name directly into my ear. It wasn't a sound coming from across the room. It wasn't muffled or distant. It was close, intimate. clear as day. The way someone says your name when they're standing right next to you. My entire body reacted before my mind did. A jolt of fear shot through me so fast it felt electric. I didn't stop to think. I didn't turn around to check. I didn't call out. I dropped everything and sprinted out of the room faster than I ever have in my life. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. I didn't slow down until I was far away from that space. Somewhere I felt less alone. I tried to rationalize it afterward. Maybe someone had said my name and I misheard it. Maybe my parents were home and called out from another room. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I was alone. I knew the difference between a voice carried through the house and a whisper directly into your ear. That moment changed how I felt about being alone in that house. Closets especially stopped feeling like neutral spaces. They felt like places you didn't linger in longer than necessary. Another experience happened in the basement, a place that already had an uncomfortable atmosphere. It wasn't terrifying all the time, but it never felt completely welcoming either. The basement had a small closet, nothing large, just enough space for storage. One day, my sister and I had friends over. We were all teenagers, curious and a little reckless, feeding off each other's energy. Someone suggested trying one of those paranormal investigation ideas we had seen on TV, the kind where people use recording devices to ask questions and listen back later to see if they catch anything. At the time, it felt more like a joke than a serious attempt. None of us truly believed we would hear anything. We set up a tape recorder and asked a few questions out loud, probably laughing and feeling silly while doing it. Then we let the tape run for a bit before turning it off. When we played it back, we were still expecting nothing. Just silence. Maybe our own voices or background noise. But that's not what we heard. Underneath the quiet hum of the recording, there was a very soft voice. It was faint, but unmistakable once you noticed it. The voice said, "I'm in the closet." Every single one of us froze. The room went dead silent. We looked at each other, then slowly turned our attention to the small closet nearby. That was the closet the voice referred to. There was no mistaking it. No one laughed. No one tried to explain it away. The tone of the voice wasn't loud or aggressive, but it wasn't playful either. It sounded matter-of-fact, like a simple statement of location. The idea that something had responded directly to us using words shook all of us more than any random noise could have. That night ended early. People went home. The basement felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were closer than before. As the years passed, things like this continued to happen. Not constantly, but often enough that the house felt unpredictable. You never knew when something strange might happen, which made it worse than if it were constant. You could go weeks without an incident, then suddenly be reminded that you weren't alone in the way you thought you were. Eventually, my parents decided to sell the house. There were many reasons, practical ones, but I've always wondered if some part of them felt the same unease we did, even if it was never fully discussed. Before the house sold, we moved into a new place. Life shifted forward. The old house sat empty except for showings, waiting for new owners. It felt strange knowing no one was living there anymore, like something essential had been removed from it. One evening, my sister stopped by the old house after a couple of showings had taken place. The real estate agent had left lights on throughout the house, and she went back to turn them off. She went alone. She had been there so many times before that she probably didn't think twice about it. She moved through the rooms, flipping switches, familiar with the layout. When she went down into the basement, she started turning off the lights one by one. The basement had multiple light switches, not all of them conveniently placed. One of them was at the far end of the basement, away from the stairs. She walked over, turned the light off, and that's when she heard it. Heavy footfalls. Loud, fast, unmistakable footsteps running toward her from behind. She didn't wait to see what it was. She didn't turn around. She ran. She bolted up the stairs, out of the basement, out of the house, leaving lights on behind her. She didn't even slow down to finish turning everything off. She slammed the door, locked it, and got out of there as fast as she could. The sound of those footsteps stayed with her. She knew what running sounded like. She knew the difference between a house settling and something moving with intention. That was the last time either of us went back to that house while it was empty. After it sold, time passed. One day, we happened to be in the neighborhood when the new owners recognized us and invited us inside to see the renovations they had done. The house looked different, updated, brighter, changed. Walking through it felt strange, like seeing someone else living inside a memory that used to belong to you. Nothing happened while we were there. No whispers, no footsteps, no strange feelings that we could pinpoint. The new owners were friendly and cheerful. At one point, they casually asked if we wanted to babysit their kids sometime. My sister and I exchanged a look without saying a word. We politely declined. There was no dramatic explanation, no stories shared, just a quiet, firm no. Some places leave marks on you. Even when nothing's happening in the moment, your body remembers what it felt like before. That house was one of those places. Whatever lived there, whatever made itself known during those years, stayed behind when we left. And I'm grateful for that. Because I've never had experiences like that again, and I don't want to. This is my mom's story, not mine, but I believe her completely. She is a practical, grounded person, not someone who exaggerates or invents things for attention. She's calm, logical, and steady, the kind of person who would rather find a reasonable explanation than jump to something supernatural. That's part of why this story has stayed with me. She didn't tell it dramatically. She didn't embellish it. She told it plainly, like something strange that happened to her once and never happened again. Several years ago, my parents traveled to South Carolina for a wedding. It was meant to be a pleasant trip, a short getaway mixed with a family obligation. Instead of staying at a modern hotel, they booked a room at an old plantation-style bed and breakfast. The place was known for its history and charm, the kind of location people choose because it feels elegant and timeless. It was one of those large, historic homes with wide porches, tall windows, and rooms that had clearly existed long before electricity, air conditioning, or smartphones were ever imagined. When my mom first arrived, nothing felt wrong to her. She noticed the age of the building, of course, but not in a negative way. It felt quiet, dignified, and preserved, like a place that had seen many generations come and go. The furniture looked antique, but well-maintained. The floors creaked slightly underfoot. The walls felt thick, solid, like they had stories locked inside them, but no urge to share. If anything, it felt peaceful. My mom didn't feel uneasy or watched. She didn't get chills or strange feelings. It was just an old place with character. That night, after a long day of traveling and attending wedding-related events, my parents went to bed. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp and the faint glow from outside. My mom plugged her cell phone into the wall and placed it on the nightstand beside the bed. It was charging, and like many phones do, it occasionally blinked when a notification came through. She fell asleep without thinking much about it, tired in that deep, heavy way that makes sleep come quickly. Sometime during the night, she woke up suddenly. Not slowly, not groggy. She snapped awake all at once, the way you do when something pulls you out of sleep without warning. She didn't know why she had woken up at first. The room was quiet. My dad was asleep beside her. Nothing seemed wrong. Then she noticed the blinking light from her phone on the nightstand. A notification had come in, causing the screen to briefly glow in the darkness. As her eyes adjusted, she realized she wasn't alone. Standing in the room was a woman she had never seen before. She wasn't vague or transparent. She wasn't a shadow or shape. She looked solid and fully formed. The woman was dressed in an old-fashioned formal gown, the kind you might see in paintings or historical films. The dress was full, elegant, and clearly from another era. It wasn't modern in any way. The fabric appeared heavy, carefully tailored, and formal, like something worn for an important occasion long ago. The woman's attention was completely fixed on the blinking cell phone. She wasn't looking around the room. She wasn't looking at my mom. She was staring at the phone like it was the most fascinating thing she had ever seen. Slowly, calmly, she began walking toward it. There was no rush, no aggression, no sense of threat. It was almost like curiosity, pure and simple, as if she had noticed something unfamiliar and was drawn to it without understanding what it was. My mom didn't scream. She didn't jump out of bed. She didn't freeze in terror. Later, she said the strangest part was how calm she felt in that moment. Confused, yes. Shocked, absolutely. But not overwhelmed with fear. It was like her mind accepted the situation before her emotions had time to react. She watched the woman move closer to the nightstand, mesmerized by the blinking light. Without fully thinking about it, my mom spoke. She gently said that it was okay, that it was just a phone. Her voice was calm, reassuring, the same tone she might use to comfort a confused child or explain something new to someone unfamiliar with it. She didn't shout. She didn't challenge the woman. She simply explained. At that moment, the woman stopped walking. She turned her head and looked directly at my mom. Their eyes met. My mom said the eye contact was clear and unmistakable. This wasn't something glancing in her direction or vaguely acknowledging her presence. The woman saw her, recognized her, acknowledged her. For a brief moment, they were fully aware of each other. Then, without sound, without movement, without drama, the woman disappeared. She didn't fade slowly. She didn't walk away. She didn't dissolve into mist. One moment she was there, and the next moment she simply wasn't. The room was empty again, just like it had been before. The phone continued blinking softly on the nightstand. My dad slept on, unaware that anything had happened. My mom lay there, wide awake, staring at the space where the woman had been. Her heart was racing now, catching up to what her mind had just experienced. She tried to make sense of it. She checked the room. She looked around. There was no sign anyone had been there. The door was closed. The room was exactly the same as it had been when she went to sleep. Eventually, she woke my dad and told him what happened. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't crying. She told him calmly, describing exactly what she saw. He listened. He didn't immediately dismiss her, but he also didn't have an explanation. They talked quietly for a while, then eventually went back to sleep. The rest of the night passed without incident. In the morning, my mom didn't feel scared of the room. She didn't rush to leave or ask to change rooms. If anything, she felt thoughtful, reflective. The experience stayed with her, but not in a way that felt threatening. It felt strange, yes, but also oddly gentle. The woman hadn't seemed angry or frightening. She seemed curious, maybe even confused, drawn to something she didn't understand. When my mom later learned more about the place, it made the experience feel heavier. The bed and breakfast had once been part of a plantation. Generations of people had lived and worked there. Countless lives had passed through those rooms. Love, suffering, joy, and loss had all existed within those walls. The idea that someone from another time might still linger there didn't feel impossible. Not after what she had seen. What struck my mom most, and what she still mentions when telling the story, was the woman's fascination with the phone. A blinking light from a small device, something so ordinary to us now, would have been unimaginable to someone from centuries ago. To see it light up in the dark, respond to unseen messages, glow without flame, must have seemed almost magical. The idea that the woman wasn't there to frighten anyone, but simply reacting to something new, made the encounter feel less like a haunting and more like a brief crossing of two different times. My mom never saw the woman again. Nothing else strange happened during their stay. They finished the trip, attended the wedding, and returned home. Life continued as normal. The experience didn't follow her. It didn't repeat. It didn't escalate. It remained a single moment, isolated and unforgettable. Some people might say it was a dream, a trick of the mind, or sleep paralysis. My mom has considered those explanations. But she always comes back to the same thing. She was awake. She spoke. The woman reacted. There was awareness on both sides. It didn't feel like a dream unfolding inside her own mind. It felt like an interaction, brief and unexpected. Whatever that woman was, wherever she came from, she wasn't hostile. She wasn't terrifying. She was simply there, caught between moments, drawn to a blinking light that didn't belong to her world. And for just a few seconds, she and my mom shared the same space, acknowledged each other's existence, and then went back to their separate realities. That's why I believe my mom when she tells the story. Not because it was dramatic or frightening, but because it was quiet, because it didn't turn into anything more, because it sounded exactly like something that happened, not something meant to impress or scare, and because sometimes the most unsettling experiences aren't the ones filled with chaos or terror, but the ones that happen calmly, gently, and without explanation, leaving you with nothing but the certainty that the world is larger and stranger than we like to admit. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.